Good day, everyone. Scooter coming to you live from the Granville Guitars World Headquarters here in lovely St. Petersburg, Florida. Want to do part 2 of this 1976 Fender Vibrolux Reverb video here. It's all done. Took me a while. Had repairs to do this week. This was not the only thing I was working on. As we zoom in there, you can see that the panel is now clean, but it's still got the insidious worm scratches that these silver face panels can sometimes get. But at least it's clean, and from certain angles you can't see any of that scratching, which is nice. So cleaned up the knobs, but not enough to where the knobs don't look genuine. They still look righteous. They're just a little bit more cleaned up than they were. And we've done the cab already as well. Got it all cleaned up and spiffy, and using my, as I mentioned in the first video, I like to use non-ammonia Windex and a vegetable brush with no handle that you operate with the palm of your hand and just swirl it around and wet it down at least twice with the Windex, and then just towel it off with paper towels. That leaves the Tolex looking cleaner, but still old. Never, in my opinion, should you ever use a product like Armor All on the Tolex of a vintage amplifier, because it just looks lousy. Okay, we're going to zoom in real close here and look at the cabinet repairs that I had to do. Okay, if you'll recall, we had some cabinet damage to repair. The two seams on either side, actually, of the cabinet were separating, and the Tolex had come out a little bit. I had to get creative with some fill-in right here. You can definitely see where it's been repaired. The Tolex has a bit of a cracked seam right here, but overall I'm quite pleased with how it went together, so much so that as I was standing here looking at the first bit here, as I was just chatting in that first segment, I'd forgotten that I'd done cabinet repairs on this. Let's see if I can get that thing to focus here. Let's swing it around a little bit. There we go. That's better. That's much better. You can see where it's been repaired, but from a distance it really doesn't catch the eye the way it did. It was pretty messed up. I had to go, I did not have a wood clamp of sufficient mouth size to go around the entire cabinet, and I ended up using a number of clamps all at the same time from different directions to clamp it in. The baffle in this amp is not removable as it is on some Fender amps. It's actually fitted down into a slot, and it's basically a permanent part of the cabinet. And fortunately, this one's in good shape, because replacing it is a real pain. Let's look at the other side here. And as you can see, the other side, you know, I managed to get the Tolex stuffed back under there again, and got the seam all closed up. It was quite a chore. It required some planning and some different clamping, and you know, getting the Tolex down in there afterwards. That was a lot of fun, as you can imagine. But it worked out pretty well, and I'm pretty pleased with the result. You know, it's not going to fool anybody into thinking it's never been repaired. But once a cabinet separation like that happens, it's kind of hard to disguise completely. But I'm pleased with how it turned out. So there you go. Okay, now we're around back here, and we'll be able to see. I'm going to take this thing off the tripod here. What the heck? Tripod is kind of just messing with me today in this particular instance. All right. Cleaned up the back panel quite a bit. As you can see, it doesn't look overly cleaned. Here's some better light. And everything is back as it should be. Cleaned up the speakers. They were quite covered with dust. And got them looking good. Also, the reverb tank bag was a real disaster. Just covered with dust. And I cleaned it the same way as the exterior Tolex. Cables out of the way here. Cleaned them the same way as the exterior Tolex. Ammonia-free Windex, that's important. The ammonia Windex doesn't work as well, I don't think. I think the ammonia-free stuff has nothing to do with anything other than what I think works better. So I've got all that cleaned up the back panels very nicely, and like I said, it doesn't look shiny and new. It still looks old, but it's clean, and you can see that on the top as well. The top was all spotty and grimy. Did nothing to the chassis straps or the handle in terms of polishing or anything like that. I want that patina to stay in place. Don't want anybody to think this is a brand new amplifier. Just wanted it to be cleaned up some. As far as the interior of the amp goes, I ended up doing the changes to the reverb section that I mentioned previously, and ended up having to change out the reverb driver transformer, which was something that happens a lot in these silver faces. Those transformers blow up because of those weird values in the transformer, or rather in the reverb section, that drives that reverb driver tube into failure, basically, and takes out that little transformer. So I had to put a new reverb transformer in it, but we've got the original cables and the original tank, and so much of the original circuitry is still in place, as I had hoped. All of the tubes that came in, all of the 12AX7s and 12AT7s are the same ones. I left them all in place. They were all good, and they all worked fine. One of the power tubes was pretty bad, unfortunately, so I put a new pair of power tubes in there. Ended up with some Chinese-made rubies in this amp. I have favorites that I like to use, as most tube amp guys do, and then that's usually JJ's. But in the case of this amplifier, these Chinese ruby tubes just sounded the best. I also did not use the 5R4 rectifier tube that came in with it. It sounded good with that, but it was a little bit too mid-forward for me. It didn't really sound Fender-ish. So I put a JJ5 U4GB, which is what the original spec calls for, and now it's doing what it should do. So we have new rec tube, new power tubes, new caps, reconditioned reverb circuit. That's really all that I did, and it's pretty much covered in the last video. How about we see what this thing sounds like, huh? Alrighty, we're all set up on the bench, microphones attached and plugged in, and it was a lot of work, but it's a cool amp. It's a very cool amp. It may be staying with me. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, but it's very, very fun. Tremolo works. One of the great things about the Vibrolux is it really is a different animal in the realm of Fender amplifiers. It's kind of a redheaded stepchild, if you will. It's bigger and more powerful than the Deluxe, but slightly less powerful than the Pro. So it's kind of in the middle there. I have a Pro, as you know if you've watched my other videos, and I love it. But this thing not only feels different, it sounds very different. It's a different animal altogether. You can get some dirt out of it. We're going to do that here in just a minute, but I'm just real pleased with it. For those of you who are curious, the settings that was on, bright switch is off, which is my usual preference. Sometimes I'll run across a black face that needs the bright switch on all the time for whatever reason. Component drift, who knows what. But this one seems to be plenty bright without it at all volume ranges. So bright switch is off. I've got the volume at about just a little under 5 right now. The treble is at 4. The bass is about 2. Reverb there was at 4. Speed on the tremolo presently is 4, and I had the intensity up around 9, but that's really intense. To me, one of the health checks for these amps when I get them up on the bench, when you're checking the reverb and the tremolo and everything, excuse me, the tremolo shouldn't need to have its intensity all the way up for you to hear it. If it does, there's something probably wrong with it. Also, the reverb should probably sound its best around 4.5 or so. If you have to crank that control, probably something getting sick with that. Yeah, that's the reverb at 4, and that's wet. So let's see if we can coax some dirt out of this thing. I'm gonna turn the reverb off. I'm gonna turn my mid booster on the pickups to get a little bit more mid push out of it. All right, let's push the volume some. Take it up to about 7. Now that's nice and crunchy, but it's still got some chime to it if you back down on your volume control. That's at about 8 on my volume on the guitar. All right, let's peg this thing, shall we? All right, I'm going to leave the guitar down about 7.5. That's a hell of a lot of fun. Now keep in mind, too, those are the original speakers. 1976 Eminence speakers that this amp came with, and sounds pretty good to me. Let's check out the normal channel. Again, treble's on about 4. Bass is around 2. It's got a little leaner sound to it. Turn the bass up a little. I never like to work the bass too hard on a Fender amp because the way the bass control is usually voiced, it just turns into mush in a hurry. So 9 times out of 10, the bass gets left, you know, very low or off. You're never going to win that fight with a bass player anyway, folks. Learn to make yourself happy when you're playing with a band. Don't get obsessed with the low end off your amps because you're never going to win that fight. If you're on stage with a PA and a drummer and a kick drum mic'd up through a PA, let them have those frequencies. You're just going to frustrate yourself. Okay, that's on about 6 on that channel. Let's see what pegged sounds like. Seems a little toothier. But it's real nice and chimey and sustain's really good. It's got a nice little swirl to things. I'm digging it. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I guess the lesson to be learned here, and it's one that I kind of hammer home in a lot of these videos, is don't thumb your nose up at a vintage amp just because it's not the correct era for you in your head. There are good deals to be had on silver faces, particularly this silver face. The Vibroluxes are out there. They're not as plentiful as maybe other models, but they're out there and they can be had reasonably. And 9 times out of 10, you fix them up a little bit and they sound perfectly wonderful. So I guess that's about all I got time for today. Thanks for tuning in. I have been your good friend Scooter here at Granville Guitars. If you have any questions about anything we do here at Granville Guitars, seek us out on the web at www.granvilleguitars.com or Facebook or Instagram, of course, and also the blog over at WordPress, A View from the Granville Bench. That's all I got time for today. Be nice to each other.